Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dare to ask. And we're part of the Game Dev London community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love about the details behind making games, whether or not you're actually based in London. And I am delighted today to be joined by Ffion. Ffion, please introduce yourself. So tell us a bit about you're a freelance community manager, is that right?
Yes, that is right. So I've been a freelance community manager for about 9 months now. So my time in the industry is very short. But initially I had sort of 3 years doing a sort of general gaming Discord server. And I was doing that throughout university. And I came out of university and was thinking, oh, well, what do I want to do as a career? And gaming kind of seemed like the logical choice because it's been such a big part of my life, and realizing actually this sort of community experience I've got with this Discord server is transferable straight into community management.
Absolutely. And I think so. What's interesting, we've done a few podcasts lately about how to get into games, and here you are. You've gone through the university experience. You're using the experience presumably as a player and as somebody running a Discord server, building an audience, a community, and you say it's a logical choice. There's not always a logical choice for lots of people. I think. Yeah, how did you understand that games was a potential role, a potential job, a potential career even?
I think I was kind of lucky and realized the scale of the games industry, and was kind of talking to people in the space and found like mentoring programs and things, and saw actually there's lots of programs going on to try and get people into the games industry, and it's just as viable as going into like film or that kind of route. I did photography and as my degree, and the university I went to was called the University for the Creative Arts, so it was solely based upon people doing animation and those kinds of courses. So I was kind of surrounded by this
Which
environment.
campus were you on? Because I know that there's one near me in Farnham.
That's the one I
Was
went
that the
to.
one? Yeah.
Yeah,
Because that's actually a great course, and there's some great. They actually do have a games course at that
they do.
location as well. A couple of my friends are actually to the lecturers on it as well. So, although I've not seen them since before the pandemic, so I'm not sure what a friend that says I am. But the point being that so it's interesting. Here you are. You're not specifically getting a training in the games side, even though you're in a creative experience, creative environment. But what is it that you're? How are you bringing? Are you? Do you think it matters that you're not bringing your photography skill set to this, or are you finding that it was the experience of being in university that allowed you to get exposed to the kind of skills that you need in the role that you're currently doing?
Um, I think it's interesting because initially I was very artsy, and um, games art was actually the course I was looking at first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I kind of chickened out and picked photography, even though I did love photography. I thought, oh, actually, maybe I'll be more successful doing photography than I will doing games art. When in reality, games is what I really enjoyed, and seeing all these like illustrations of gaming characters and stuff, that's what I wanted to be a part of. So that where my sort of games motivation has come from is wanting to be a part of teams that are creating these sort of artistic things, these projects, and that's what I wanted to be a part of. But in terms of photography, um, I feel like I do. There's definitely transferable skills there, especially when it comes to sort of the marketing side and like imagery and social media. Um,
Or
I know
composition,
exactly.
layout. Is understanding kind of the effects that the filters and things like that, and how you can then apply them. I think that I absolutely agree. I think one of the things I want to hone in on though, I think this is something really interesting there about you kind of chickened out, and I think there's a really common thing. I mean, I don't I didn't quite check it out, but I remember when I first started a long time ago. It was 1987. Would you believe? Yes, I am that old. I was 18. Gave my first pitch to a company called Rainbird at the time. It was Rainbird, one of those anyway. And they said, "Great idea, come back when you made it." And of course, we didn't have any money, we couldn't do it. So I went and did a course, and the course I ended up doing was a marketing course. So I ended up in mainstream IT, doing mainstream IT marketing for about, well, just under 10 years before I got the chance to get the games job. But I always knew I wanted the games job. But I think you're often faced with a decision, because let's face it, games jobs aren't necessarily the best paid, because there are a lot more people who want to be part of that experience.
Yeah.
There's lots of temptations to draw you away from doing the job that you really care about. Is that fair?
Yeah. And you almost have this dream job in mind, and you think, oh, that's not achievable. No matter what job it is, what industry it's in. I feel like there's so many people that would say, oh, I'd love to make paintings and just go and sell them, and have a little cafe or something. Um, and we just don't think it's realistic, when actually, why not? Why isn't it really realistic? You just have to put your mind to something and go and
Exactly,
do it.
and I totally agree. And I mean, it's an interesting one, because even becoming a publisher, in fact, even calling myself a game designer took me ages. I mean, because I consider myself, well, don't get me wrong, I'm not shy about my skill set, but it's interesting how I was quite happy being a product owner in a telco for games, therefore the games guy. But to realize how much of that work I was doing was game design.
Mm,
It wasn't until I actually joined Sony and started doing the requirements for this online gaming platform, the world, the PlayStation Home environment, that I suddenly realized just how much my everyday work was game design. It was different aspects, sure, but it was design. And I think that realization that when you've been doing the job without realizing it, is sometimes as hard as feeling like, I don't want to say imposter syndrome. This is the trouble. I don't want to get into that, because I think there's an interesting way of looking at that. Is it imposter syndrome? Because I know I did the work. I don't know, but do I necessarily value my skill set? Did you experience any of that when you were kind of first looking at trying to do this professionally?
yeah, definitely. And I think it was when I was pulling my CV together and trying to come up with transferable skills. I did have transferable skills, but I didn't necessarily want to put them down, because I was thinking, oh, well, it doesn't apply to this, or I haven't done that job specifically, when I was looking at job descriptions. So, yeah, for sure. It was definitely a struggle.
So what helped you get through that? What you said you put your CV together, and you've obviously presumably applied to a number of things. What was it that made the ability for you to make that difference?
So one of the best things I did was sign up to a mentoring program called Limit Break, which is also happening now at the moment.
It certainly is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, my mentor, Toby,
Mm.
he kind of just opened my eyes as to what my skills were, without even necessarily knowing um, me, because he knew what I'd done. He knew I did photography, and he was like, "Oh, well, community management, you can do this, you can do that." Um, and I was like, "I can do that." And it was a bit of self belief that sort of sparked within me. Um, yeah, and then that sort of it made me a lot more confident in applying to roles and actually selling myself more. Um,
Yeah, as I was talking a few weeks ago with Brandon from Limit Break about what they're trying to do this, and I think it's interesting having you here as a kind of the other side of that story where you've experienced it. And I'm down as a mentor there, but I haven't done very much because I'm always so busy. But I'm trying to do more. It's my fault, but I think it's really interesting that the setup they're trying to achieve, in terms of, how do you create an experience. Actually, no, Brandon's into games, isn't he? Sorry, I always forget. There's so many different schemes. I forget which mentoring scheme is which. But the point of this is, though, whether you're an individual like yourself, a student, or sort of postgraduate who's looking at how to enter the industry, finding somebody who has experience, who is able to give you insight, to give you that kind of sounding board. I don't think they can give you confidence, but I think they can give you a sounding board to let yourself give yourself confidence. Is that fair?
Yes, yeah, definitely agree with that. Because it's only yourself that can sort of put two and two together and
Mm.
really put yourself forward. Um, and also, the good thing about the mentoring program is, for me, entering the industry, it sort of seemed this big scary place.
Yeah.
Um, and the mentoring program sort of, it gave me a way in without making me feel like I was sort of just messaging someone saying, "Oh, can you help me?"
Mm.
Um, and on LinkedIn, especially, everyone sort of says in the gaming industry, "Oh, just message someone, do some networking." But
Mm.
getting into the industry, it feels like you're just, I don't know, almost a bit like a burden, or you're just sort of taking up people's time.
Yeah, you don't want to take up space, and it feels like a big thing. You reach out to people who've got these, you know, tens of years of experience, and you go, well, why would they listen to little old me? And I think I do feel like we're very lucky in games that a lot of people are very open and very keen on engaging with people. I mean, I'd like to think it's because most of us actually care about games. Most of us
Mm,
want still love playing, and I think we're also very aware that we could do better in diversity. I think we have a particular there is always going to be an element of bias, not because of any kind of intent, but because the kinds of roles require levels of educational and economic opportunity in order to be in a position to take them up. But that's not an excuse. That's just a practical kind of consequence of where we currently are, and we need to do better at breaking that down.
yeah.
But I think it's interesting how you've shown that there is a way you've been able to get in by looking at the skills you have, by reaching out, by engaging, by networking. So was it just the one mentor you had, or did you do any other kind of engaging exercises or events or anything like that?
So I did the mentoring alongside, I was sort of just looking at online, like, jobs events within the gaming industry. Women in Games was one that I remember was very, I don't know, it was very memorable for me. Just getting into the industry because they were doing, like, you could send in your CV and they'd do it live and they'd go through it.
Nice.
Um, yeah, so there's lots of opportunities out there. You just have to take them.
Yeah, and it's difficult one, isn't it? Because did you have any trepidation, anything you were worried about in terms of the industry, or have you found it relatively straightforward?
Um, I think the thing that's held me back the most is myself. In that I thought everyone would be, "Oh, we've got all this experience, like, we're not going to talk to you." And actually, everyone's so lovely. They just, I don't know, they welcome you with open arms, pretty much. So yeah, just actually, if you just take advantage of any opportunity you have to talk to people.
And a good example is that you were very proactive. You saw me reaching out because I've been looking at finding new people to talk to, and you just said, "Hey, you want to talk to us?" And in fact, I think you were originally intending to get me to talk to the developer you're working with.
Yes.
So you were kind of doing a BD, a business development type moment of opening a door, and then I kind of bring you in and get you to talk to me as well.
Yeah.
So you know, it, I don't think that's something that everybody does, but it is something that anyone can do.
Mm.
What gave you the confidence to do that? Was there a push somewhere? Was there a pull somewhere? What helped you do that?
Um, probably say my drive to be successful.
Mm.
And my taste of the industry so far.
Mm.
I've gotten into, so looking at data and things and seeing the graphs go up and just that kind of stuff. And it just makes me hungry to do well in the industry and with the projects I work on. I want to push them and I want them to be
Yeah.
successful. Um,
Absolutely. I think I am a lover of data, and the more data I can get, the better. But it's interesting how even though we've always been an industry that could get data, we haven't always embraced it. And I think it's the last 10 years that, particularly in mobile, where we have suddenly really embraced data, and it's had profound impact. I think it's the single reason why mobile is currently the largest part of the industry, because it's been the most willing to embrace the data. Oh, well, there are other reasons too, though. Let's not go into that. But so here you are. You've got this drive. You're looking at, you're interested in the data. You're interested in being successful. You're interested in kind of representing people. So let's talk a bit about that first, or the first role that you or the main role that you're doing now. So who is it you're working with now, and what are the kind of particular challenges that you're facing in that context?
Yeah, so I'm currently working for Tom Sennett Games. He did work before, about 10 years ago, in the industry. And one of his main games before was Run Man Race Around the World, which he
Yeah,
collaborated with Maddie Sawson on. Um, and currently he's making the sequel to that game, Run Man Turbo. Um, and I'd say the biggest challenge is getting the word out, building that community, making people aware that this is happening and getting people on board.
yeah. And I think that's always difficult, especially when there's been a gap. When you've had history, you've got legacy, but there's been a gap between that game and it. And I feel that pain myself, because most of the stuff that I did that was public was decades ago. I mean, PlayStation Home was like 12 years ago. Well, 11, 12 years ago, something like that.
Hmm.
And that's ridiculous. That's like most people's careers have gone by in that time. And I've been doing things since then. Yes, I was an evangelist at Unity, but that's not the point. I don't get thought of as a game person as in the same way. I get thought of as a sort of BD type person, not a maker type person,
Yeah.
because I haven't been as visible. I've been consulting. I haven't been doing. So I think it's interesting that kind of challenge is profound. Have you found that's the same with the players, or is there a nostalgia amongst the playing audience for the original game?
There's definitely nostalgia, and it's, as someone who didn't play the original game, wasn't aware of it, and then trying to build up this community again, seeing people saying, "Oh my God, Runman's coming back," is actually really nice and satisfying to see, because you can tell that there's this love for the game.
Mm.
People just, yeah, it's just kind of been lost in all the years. It's quite hard to stay relevant.
Yeah, I mean, keeping relevant is really difficult, and having that nostalgia is great. But how do you kind of like communicate? Because how long? I'm not sure what stage the development the game is at, but I imagine there's going to be some time between announcing and releasing. And how do you keep people's expectations in check? Because I think we all know, when we look at a game that we loved in the past, we will quite often expect a sequel to be vastly upgraded,
Hmm.
because our memory of how it felt is what we're looking for, not necessarily what the game what is. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, I think it's tricky, because you're sort of, if you revisit games you've played in the past that you have this great memory of, you actually play them and then realize, oh, this isn't what I remember. Because the nostalgia almost comes with like the childhood feelings of, I don't know, beating your first boss or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas you're at a different point in your life, so those feelings are completely different. Um,
And you've experienced more, you've played more things, you've seen other opportunities for how a game can work out, and therefore you might have more nuance expect. Is that all fair?
yeah, no, exactly. And especially today, where there's hundreds of games, well, thousands of games that you can just,
Literally millions on the
yes,
App Store.
exactly. Yeah,
And
so
that's just the mobile. I mean, let alone PC. I mean, console. The quantity of the game is huge.
yeah. And so many people are just making sort of their own passion projects and sticking them up
Yeah.
on stores. So yeah, it's a definitely a tricky one to navigate. Um, especially within the indie scene, I'd say, because we're taking the approach of trying to be a bit more open throughout the development process, and showing all those steps along the way, as opposed to maybe a AAA company who would just drop some gameplay trailers
Yeah, well,
throughout the
not even
development.
gameplay trailers. They might
No,
drop down some, awesome animation that is not actual
nothing.
gameplay.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate that. I honestly, if you're going to show me something, show me what the game is. I want to know what the game. What do I know? But I think you got a point there. That is incredibly fine line to walk it down, where you're trying to create an experience that you're sharing with players as you make the game, because you're having to help retain their attention for a long period of time. You may not always be able to keep up a set of messages. The updates may not always be positive. They may not always be because games are iterative. They step forwards and step back. How are you dealing with that? I mean, is this now you're helping communicate a game that's being developed as it's going along? What are the lessons you're learning about that process and how you communicate it?
Um, I'd say it changes all the time, especially within social media. What people want to see is constantly developing and changing, and you kind of have to navigate that landscape quite carefully, because something that might do well that people wanted to see a month ago has actually completely changed and it's not as engaging anymore. Um, and obviously, making engaging content is kind of everything that you want to do. Um, yeah, so yeah.
I get it. It's difficult. The reason I ask the question is because I think one of the biggest challenges is quite often the kinds of things that we're making, a designer will understand why you're doing something in a particular way, because it's not always about what the moment of experience is for that particular player at that particular time. There's often contextual reasons. So I do this world with these things in it, not because you care about these things, but when you get to this stage, you're going to need a mechanism, a system that allows me to then take you to the next stage. And I can't do that if I haven't built these systems.
Yeah.
And that's just the gameplay design, let alone the actual functional systems. Like, I thoroughly recommend game devs do as much as they can on the server, because then they can update the game dynamically. And I also think putting in-game community messages as well, and communicating in-game is important as that through social platforms. But building those kind of systems, lots of work is done and very little progress is visible. And if you've got to have a daily, weekly, or a monthly beat of an update to community to make people feel that you're still working on it, you're still, if you've got a lot of work being focused, rightly so, on something that looks invisible to the player, how are they going to know that you've done anything useful?
No, exactly. It's very difficult to come up with when all the work that has been done is purely sort of functionality and not things that will engage the player. Um, it's very difficult to come up with, or more difficult to come up with ideas to share. Um, but yeah, one thing I try and do to combat that is we have weekly meetings, and I'm always writing down any little thing that might that's been changed in the game that might sort of spark an idea for a social media post, or
Yeah.
something that will help engage the community. Um,
So what sort of things? I mean, I've seen things like doing a dev blog. I've seen things like having an artist record their whole process and then speeding up, and then maybe you get them to talk through their what they were doing during the sped up version.
mhm.
That, I mean, they're to me a fairly straightforward. Are they the sort of things you're looking at, or have you found any other kind of interesting kind of avenues to pursue?
Yeah, they're kind of, I mean, a devlog, we do a monthly devlog, and then we can sort of take those bits and post them elsewhere. Engaging the community on Reddit as well, and kind of trying to make conversation around certain aspects of the game is
Yes.
also quite important. and it's good to hear community feedback on what they want from the game. Um, I think game development is kind of in a tricky space because you come up with a good idea for a game, um, and you try and commit to that, but it's also a product at the end of the day, and you've got to sort of fit this product around the gaming audience that um, you have to find the gap in the market for these people, and you have to fit the game around these people.
Yeah.
You can't just make whatever you want and hope it works out.
Oh, exactly. I'm probably bore everyone listening because I say the same thing every time almost, which is I think of games as being the second worst thing in the world. Making games, because you've got the science, the technology, the narrative, the art, the marketing, the commercialization, all of those things you've got to do at once, and it's all down to the subjective opinion of players. But of course, the worst thing is not making games.
Yes.
So again, like I say, it's a common joke, but I think there's something in it, which is, like you say, you've got to make something for the audience rather than yourself. And I think getting the audience to go with you is a really important thing. One of the lessons I learned doing Kickstarter is you can't always take your audience with you either. You've kind of got to build it where they are. And I think it's interesting. For example, you're looking at Reddit. Is that where the community already were? The people who fans of the original game?
Yes. So I found that the majority of people who have said, "Oh yes, I used to play the old game," they have been on Reddit. There's been some on Twitter and
Yeah.
Instagram, but yeah, Reddit I feel like is where you can find people of all ages on there. It's kind of a nice space for gamers. Yeah,
Reddit can be hit and miss, though, can't it? It can be an incredibly joyful place to be, but it can also be quite hostile in certain subreddits, at least.
yes,
Or at least you can make mistakes and they are unforgiven quite quickly. Is
yeah,
that fair?
yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's quite interesting. Maybe it's just something people on the internet think about more than Reddit specifically.
Yeah.
But people will make comments about the game and what they think should be in the game, or things that have already been planned to be put in the game, but
Yeah.
at this point in development, it's not in the timeline.
Well, there you are. Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of how do you deal with those comments and that negativity
Mm.
um, without sort of spoiling too much or giving too much away.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one, because I think authenticity at the end of the day is the key to all of this stuff. I think if you're not a genuine fan of the game, you can't really represent the game. Uh, Although it's a little bit more complicated than just it's not black and white as it sounds. But I think you definitely need to be an authentic fan at the end of the day. But I think you've got to understand and listen to the players at the end of the day, and you've got to be someone that they can see that you're a gamer. If you the worst, I think quite often when we see these negative backlashes, it's often where someone's gone in not respecting the community, not respecting what the community is after, and also where they've often either said no, they won't do anything the community asks, or they will dismiss what the community asks. But I think the biggest challenge, or at least the thing that I find most interesting, is I don't think you have to say yes. What you have to say is why, and you have to show that you've understood what they're after, and you can share back that you've paid attention, you want to pay attention, but this is actually the direction we're making, and this is why we're trying to make that, and taking that, audience, showing an audience that you're doing it for positive gameplay reasons.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah. And I think people will often sort of bring up pain points within games without actually realizing why it's a pain point for them. Um, or they'll say, oh, this is an issue, when actually that isn't an issue. It's a feeling or something linked to that
Yeah.
that needs to be changed.
Well,
And
often
yeah,
it's a challenge itself. It's like that is the point of the challenge. If that was taken away, there wouldn't be the risk. And if that risk wasn't there, they wouldn't be enjoying things that they actually. There could be no. Am I making sense? Like,
yes, yeah, um, yeah, and it's definitely sort of trying to speak to the community. I mean, that's one of the challenges of community management. You have to speak to the community as a real person and in normal people language, whilst trying to communicate game dev language and what you're doing to try and make the community happy.
exactly. You don't want to turn around and say something ridiculous. It's so many memes on the "Hey fellow kids" or that
Uh-huh.
nonsense. Again, we kind of banned me from doing community stuff in our team because I'm not going to know the latest language, meme, etc. That being said, there are times to bring some old fool like me in because I have been doing this forever and because I, clearly, bleed game. It's having the right context. I think context is everything with these things. And I've seen some really interesting stuff. So basically, a friend of mine, he's one of the games. I won't say who it was, but one of the games I remember had a really open approach where they literally put out their roadmap and you could vote on it.
Ooh.
Now that was a great idea, except quite often things would be voted on that would be detrimental if they were done in that order.
Ah, yes.
And how would a player know? If you're not the coder, if you're not the artist, if you don't know what the resource plan is, if you don't know that particular person's going on maternity leave or that particular person is, having to go, look after their family or whatever it might, even have a holiday, because we are human beings, we do need to have rest. How could you possibly expect players to have reasonable expectations?
No, that's a tricky one. Yeah, because you definitely want to include the community in. The more you can give them a voice and make them feel like they're a part of the project,
Yeah.
I think that's really positive. But there's definitely a limit to how much influence they can have on the project.
I like to think of it as the boat-based problem. The issue wasn't that you got people voting for it. The issue is that you didn't have the appropriate intervention to make the selection choices relevant first. It's fine having lots of people submit ideas, but you then need to shortlist those with ones that you're happy to proceed with, and then get people to vote on the ones you're happy to proceed with.
Yes.
In other words, basically treating it like, I don't know, you've got a stake too.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, game developers are spending a lot of their personal money, reputation, and their life in delivering these experiences, which are really hard to do. If you're not careful, you can. I've seen a lot of game developers damage their mental health or even their physical health because of their passion and desire to release amazing games. And that's not the player's problem. That's
No.
the players are there to play a great game. And I think one of the things I think is really interesting about the community manager role is you are in that position where you're there to represent the player, but you probably also know what's going on, and working out what to say and what not to say, I imagine is quite difficult.
Yeah. And I'd also say you're also there to represent the dev team
Mm.
to the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way thing. Um, and it's important that you work with both of them. And I think it's also important for the dev team to listen to the community manager
Yeah.
and have trust in them that they can sort of speak for the community, and it's important to sort of make a place within the community that's sort of not a toxic environment. That's very easy to happen these days, I think.
Surely toxic environments don't exist in games. That's never happened.
Never.
Yeah. I joke because obviously we've always had to deal with these things,
Yeah.
and in particular where there's UGC, we've got to be really careful. People have often heard me mention on this podcast the phrase TTP, which I'll happily explain offline. Which time to, and then I'll let you work out what the P stands for. Anyway, point being is that you will always have trolls. You don't feed the trolls. Actually, with that in mind, I mean, you're still relatively new in this space. How much have you been affected by the kind of troll kind of community? Have you been safe from that so far?
Yeah, actually. So my time in industry so far has been working with small devs, sort of
Hmm.
growing from the ground up, basically, with trying to get their voice out there. I'd say definitely when I ran the Discord community before, you definitely get people coming in and trying to disrupt the piece.
Mhm.
Um,
It's
and
part of the fun.
it
Okay,
is.
not for me,
No.
not for a community manager, but for
No.
those individuals. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a tricky one because it's do you engage with it? Do you sort of just I don't know, do you engage with it publicly or do you just nip it in the bud straight away?
I have many a community manager friend who says, ban them all.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm quite that radical, but I mean, there is a truism about strict boundaries are useful. Let's put
Yes.
it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen some appalling behaviour, but we've also seen some amazing behaviour. You know, some of the best experiences I've had are where communities have got together. And I've talked about this before, but the Air Attack was a game on Wireplay back in like '99. One of the players had died, and somebody changed the map to have a gravestone to represent them, and then did a fly past. This was one of the earliest points where online gaming communities could be seen to be more than just people playing in dark rooms. And it was even in the Times as a maybe not front page, but it was covered by mainstream press. First time I think that was ever done, and that to me was a real sign of how powerful communities can be, where you see the impact that an individual and their real life has on everybody else around them.
Yeah.
And if we can harness that, if we can support that, then actually we're not just making a bit of entertainment. We're making something which is about who we choose to be.
Yes. Yeah, identity is definitely a big thing within the gaming space. And I think going off that point, communities, it's like as games, they sort of give the community the space to be the best they can be. As in communities, the best community events or things that happen within communities almost happen because of the community rather than the games pushing them to
Yes.
do something. It's more organic, I think.
There's a tipping point, I think, in design and marketing, somewhere between the two, where the momentum is driven from the game to the point where it's driven by the players. And it's a alchemy. It's a mystical form. I can't tell you what that formula looks like. I wish I could, but it's the thing I think we're always looking for, and this is why we put community at the heart of everything we do. So the people who are going to decide what the daily, weekly, monthly events are going to be in our team is going to be the community team.
Yeah.
because I think that they're the ones who are closest to what players are actually doing.
Yeah.
And that's not as common as it should be, in my view.
No, and even outside of the gaming industry, you see sort of now community managers and that kind of role starting to pop up more now. But it's surprising that that's not been a focus before. It's sort of been more around the marketing side and pushing sales rather than really understanding and getting to know your audience on a personal level, not just demographic. Yeah.
So, I mean, working with Tom, are you seeing that he's responding to this passion that people clearly have for the original game? Is he listening to that? Are you finding that process working? And what impact do you think it's having on the development cycle?
Yeah, so it's definitely difficult at this stage because the game still is in its early phases. Although the demo's gone gold. But
Yeah, I don't use the term gold anymore.
no,
But it's interesting. I mean, how many people still use the term gold? I think that's interesting.
it isn't. Yeah.
I have to sometimes explain to people why you use the word gold as well. So
To be fair, I don't know that reason either.
it's because we used to have gold CDs, which were the master CDs. So you have a gold master
Okay.
because that was the original
Yep.
master that you pressed the code onto, which would then be sent out to manufacturing and copied.
Okay. That's cool.
So that's why it's gold master.
Yeah.
So
But we don't have that anymore.
yeah, why would we? Oh, actually, they still do exist because if you're going to do a physical distribution, you will
Yes.
still have a gold master.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that, like I said, you can tell I'm old. I have all these little anecdotes. But yeah, so, you're at this demo. The demo's at gold, so presumably must be quite interesting trying to get that out and announced. Did you build up to that release?
So we're kind of in the process of that at the moment.
Right.
Next week is kind of when we're going to be hitting socials about it. Um,
That might be
so
about the same time as this comes out, so we'll find out.
yes, exactly. But yeah, hearing feedback at this stage is difficult because you've got people who love the game and actually just want to keep seeing more of what's going on, and then you've got the people who don't necessarily know the franchise.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I think you should change this, or this might be better. Which is a tricky one to navigate because Tom's got a very unique style within his games, which makes it really fun to be a part of. But it definitely, his games aren't going to appeal to the mass audiences, or not as we sort of know it. A lot of games at the moment kind of come out looking very samey. They were trying to go down this realistic route, whereas Runman isn't like that at all. So it's definitely a unique audience.
But I think this is what the part of what an indie is. It's about a statement of who I am as much as it is a piece of. In fact, it's one of those things. It's like an interest. I think indie game development is an interesting one because you ask anyone, they'll have a different definition of what indie means. But for me, there is an independence of spirit in terms of the design that I'm interested in. So whether you are financially independent or not is less important to me as whether the vision has an independent flair. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm only after the gaming auteur. I don't want that kind of like the genius leader all the time. But it's really interesting when you see people like Rami, when you see people like Mike Bithell, or you see people like Tom coming up with their own takes of what they wanted to deliver. That can be really interesting. It's kind of also sometimes the antithesis of what I try to get most game devs to do when I'm providing them with advice as a mentor, because I want to make games for an audience. And so these aren't necessarily odds, by the way. They just seem on the surface to be at odds. And I think what's interesting is making sure that, as from the community, from the outreach point of view, that you're clear what they should expect.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's non-trivial, because if you've got audiences who don't know them, how would they know the context of why that element is there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's difficult because you don't want to put off these people coming up with ideas and things, because great, but at the same time, this developer already has his own style throughout previous games. So unless you know about those games, you're not gonna understand why this game looks how it does. But it also goes back to, it's almost very simple in design. Um, and I think a lot of games now try and overcomplicate what they're doing. It's like, oh, we need to add all these mechanics in to make it different. And actually, it's, whilst you're trying to make an experience, it doesn't have to be, not all games have to be this really complicated experience mechanically, or you have to have super gamer skills to try and complete a game. You're playing it to have a good time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, I've forgotten who it is. It's a French designer who said something along the lines of, "A design is not done when I run out of things to add. A design is done when I've run out of things to take away." I love that. I love that kind of
That's
principle.
very
I'm
interesting.
terrible
Yeah.
at it. My design approach is I throw everything at it, and then I take things away until I see what's left that works.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not necessarily always the best thing, and everyone's got their own different style, as you say. So, coming full circle, so you've out of uni, you've decided you want to work in games, you've gone out and you've done the accelerator thing, you found a number of clients to work with, working on individual games, people like Tom. And in terms of that experience, so is what I mean, I'm going to ask you the interview question that everyone gets, and everyone goes, "Why are you asking me that?" But I think it's interesting because it helps kind of frame things. So, where do you see yourself being in that 5 years time thing? And the reason I think it's because, as a community person, I think it'd be interesting to see, do you see yourself, the lessons that you're learning, take you further down the development route? Do you see it taking you further down the marketing route? Or do you see that this is a space itself that has the desire, appeal, and the opportunities? Anyway, sorry, I'm talking for you.
No, it's okay. I think it's tricky because I feel like my skill set definitely lends itself more towards marketing from photography, um, and that side of things. But community has always had a soft spot in my heart, because especially growing up and being part of communities, and you see things happening and you want to be a part of things. Um, and also now, especially now in communities that I'm a part of, you see some of the bigger companies handling situations and you're like, they could have done something else with that.
They coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
and I think it's so important because the internet is great and it can also be a not very nice place. And I think as community managers, we should be trying to set a standard and making people happy and enjoy the content and not fight or, be hostile about it.
it sounds almost like you're saying it's dangerous to go alone. Take a community manager.
Yes, it's a good thing.
So thank you very much. That was great. I mean, I think what we've been talking about has basically been really interesting journey. It's interesting to see from the point of view of somebody who's coming relatively fresh, who's basically been looking for the opportunities of how to get in. A lot of the lessons that we've been talking about on previous podcasts about networking, about engaging with people, and the opportunities that community has it as a role. But I think it's really fascinating how you are ending it there. There's something about being part of something, being able to represent an audience, not just to the developers, but also for the developers. So being able to be in that pivotal point where you can truly embrace a game that you love and show others that that game is loved by the developers at least as much. After all, we're not making these things just for cash. We're not sitting there. I think even in the big AAA companies, there are very few people who are doing it just for the paycheck. Most of people who are on the coalface making games are doing so because they believe games are amazing. And I think what you described in terms of being that community person, being part of that, it is an incredibly central role to modern gaming.
It is, yeah. And I think a lot of us have sort of grown up with games, and it's only sort of recently, I'd say, that actually, even the school system and things can actually point to games as an industry that's viable, even though it has been for many, many years. But community is such a central role when it comes to games that it definitely needs to be talked about more and given more attention, I think.
And on that note, thank you very much. If somebody wants to get hold of you and find out more about what you're doing in terms of freelance community management, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yes, so you can email me at f.woolway@gmail.com.
Thank you very much. And I think you're on LinkedIn as well, because as a lot of us have started to use that a lot more.
Yes.
I've had so many people on LinkedIn, it's ridiculous. Anyway, on that note, thank you very much. And I will say, in that case, that this has been your Game Dev London podcast. I have been your host, and we have had the delight of having Ffion joining us, talking about her first entry into this industry and the role and importance of community management. If you've enjoyed this, then please like, subscribe, and do all the usual stuff that you'd expect on these things. Tell a friend. If you didn't like it, tell us, and we'll try to make it better. And don't forget, there's also the Discord group for Game Dev London you can check out and carry on the conversation and keep talking to us. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, this has been your Game Dev London podcast.